Support for Arkansas Week provided by the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette, the Arkansas Times, and KUAR-FM 89.
Hello again, everyone. Thanks very much for joining us for another special cyber edition of Arkansas Week. For the next half hour, we're going to be talking about economics in Arkansas in a time of an epidemic. We'll focus to the greatest extent we can on the Arkansas economy, but as we are about to be reminded, it's a small world. Joining us is Randy Zook, the Chief Executive Officer of the Arkansas State Chamber of Commerce. Dr. John Anderson is the head economist, head agricultural economist at the University of Arkansas's Division of Agriculture, and Dr. Mervin Jebaraj is with the Walton College of Business, where he is head of the Center for Economic and Business Research. Gentlemen, thank you all very much for being with us. Randy Zook, let me begin with you. As we tape this broadcast on Thursday morning, the new jobless figures, applications came out anyway. 4.4 million additional Americans filed for unemployment benefits. We won't know the Arkansas numbers for another several days, but suffice it to say, it's going to be substantial. Where are we?
Well, we're in the worst part of the worst economic setback and decline since the Great Depression in the 30s. So we've got a lot of tough sledding in front of us. In Arkansas, those unemployment numbers, Mervin, I'm sure we'll have some update on this in just a minute, but with the added number this week, we're crowding a couple of 100,000 people who are now out of work and have applied for unemployment compensation. That's still about, that's crowding 10% of our workforce. So we're facing some tough times, and that's the downside. The bad side. The good side is that apparently the governor is beginning to open things up, and we've got at least a chance coming up in the next few months to get back to some more normal state.
Dr. Mervin, let's go to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think the number of unemployment claims in Arkansas and around the country is unprecedented, but we've also not had a situation like this, at least since the pandemic in 1918. So in every recession, people are let go from their jobs, but it happens gradually over a period of time. This is very different in the sense that one day in March we were open and normal, and the next day in March we were all, several types of businesses were all closed at once. So the number and the spike in unemployment claims, I guess, is not, it is a concern, but it's not particularly concerning to me because we're doing it for a specific reason, and that's to fight the spread of the disease. And what we need to do is make sure that those businesses are viable and remain in operation so that when we're past the spread of infection in this disease, we can have those people be reemployed by their workplaces. So I think the unemployment claims is spectacular, but it's sort of a separate situation than any recession we've ever had. And it's different because it's not caused by economic reasons. We know why it happened. We shut the businesses down. And if we keep the businesses operational while they're shut down, we can, have all those jobs back. But there's work to be done to make sure those businesses remain operational.
So we'll come back to that in just a moment. Let me go to Dr. Anderson here and give us the food and fiber outlook. It's kind of forbidding right now, is it not, Dr. Anderson?
Well, I think it's similar to a lot of other aspects of the economy. It's a very challenging situation right now. I would say we probably haven't focused as much in agriculture on things like unemployment numbers because most of our activities have been deemed essential as being connected to the food supply. What we have seen a lot more of, and what's been a real challenge for us, has been the transition, changes in the demand for our products that have been fairly dramatic. Basically, overnight, restaurant trade all but disappeared. And everyone went to grocery stores for all of their food needs. That's a massive disruption in our world. The other big change is that a lot of our supply chains have had challenges keeping workers. A lot of news recently about processing plants and sickness in processing plants. So major demand changes and big disruptions to the supply chains are really what our sector has mostly been trying to deal with.
Well, Dr. Anderson, do you see any signs that that's going to stabilize or to smooth out? I mean, one day you can't find toilet paper, the next day you can't find dried beans or rice. Uh,
There's been a lot of that, and I think it's a challenging situation for us because we're not used to going to the grocery store and seeing shelves that aren't fully stocked, and we've seen a lot of that. And I think it's important to emphasize that we're not primarily dealing with shortages, real true shortages of product. We're dealing with the disruption of a massive sudden shock to our supply chain. So, whereas 40 to 50% of spending on food was being done in restaurants prior to this event, now 95% or so is being done in grocery stores. And it's been very difficult to redirect product into that specific supply chain. So it's not that we're not producing food or we're not producing toilet paper. Obviously, there have been some disruptions, but the big issue is that we've needed to change the distribution channels, and it takes time to do that. I do think. Go ahead.
I apologize. Let me stay with Dr. Anderson just a second here. That the availability of product, though, would appear to be, certainly in terms of animal protein, over the last 48 hours anyway, we have heard more than a dozen now, I think, pork and beef processing plants, but primarily pork. We have Tyson in Arkansas here, have been affected, shut down across the country.
Yeah, that's a major concern, and I think from this point moving forward for the next couple of weeks, that is going to be our primary concern in agriculture: is how do we continue to keep the protein supply chain full when we have plants either completely shut down, which has happened in some instances in some major plants, or we're having to cut shifts to do things like increase sanitation procedures in the plants. So far, we've been able to manage on most of the shutdowns. Companies have been able to move around. For example, Tyson closed a plant in Columbus Junction, Iowa that was processing hogs. They were able to basically redirect all of that production at that time to other plants in the neighboring area. But as these shutdowns and shift losses become more prevalent, it will become difficult to do that. And I think that's really what we need to be keeping our eye on moving forward, because that is probably the biggest challenge that we're going to see in the ag sector from this event is keeping that protein supply chain full.
Back to Dr. Jebaraj and also to Randy Zook. Both of you mentioned that Governor Hutchinson has announced that he at least contemplates within days reopening parts of the Arkansas economy, dependent, of course, on test results. How fast recognizing that none of you are medical doctors, but from an economic standpoint, from a business and commercial standpoint, is that gradual approach likely to bear fruit quickly? Randy, we'll start with you. Randy's a
Sure. Steve, I think it will bear fruit, but this is not going to be flipping a light switch on and off. This is going to take time, like the hospitals. The hospitals are going to have to reestablish their whole work system, their workflows. People are going to have to be called back, many have been laid off or furloughed because of lack of demand or elective procedures. Clinics are going to have to get back up and operating. Supplies will have to be bought. So it's not going to be quick. And the main thing that's going to have to happen is people's confidence in their ability to go to these hospitals or clinics or wherever for doctor's offices or dentists. They're going to have to feel comfortable about doing it. And that's going to be a challenge that every organization, whether it's a hospital or a grocery store or a retail store, is going to have to rebuild the confidence of first their employees and then of their customers, that I can indeed go in there and get whatever I need to do or do my work, my shift or whatever, and get home without catching the infection or have a really good chance of not being infected. So it's going to be a gradual, but I think fairly rapid, but not overnight by any means.
But Dr. Mervin, in fact, I've been reading, as I suspect all of us have, some Gallup polls, some polls from other organizations, and this virus seems to have redefined consumer confidence anyway. This economy is not going to move until people feel safe.
Right, and I think what we don't want to do is prematurely open in such a way that is haphazard. So we have people going into restaurants or other places that are in crowded situations, and we have respread of the infection happening all over again, where we'd have to do massive shutdowns like we've had in the past several weeks. So what we want to do is, if we're opening restaurants or other places of public accommodation, they're going to make sure that they have sufficient cleaning products, that people are wearing masks while they're out in public, which, the adoption of that hasn't taken hold completely here in Arkansas and around the country. And to make sure that whatever place of public accommodation it is, there's plenty of physical distance between people so that they can go about their business without, breathing each other's air. And so I think even if we open our restaurants, they're going to be making such a small amount of business compared to where they were in February and in early March. So, they're going to continue to need help. The current, bill proposed by Congress works for 8 weeks. I don't think we're going to be back to normal business in 8 weeks. So I think if we want businesses to open, we need to give them a little more certainty on the financial side from the federal government. To say, okay, well, it's going to be longer than 8 weeks. We understand your businesses won't be back to normal in 8 weeks. So this financial help will last a little bit longer than that period of time. Or else, I think there's not much incentive for restaurants and bars, et cetera, to open because they're not going to be able to get as many customers as they used to have. And we don't want them to. We're not at that place where we can have bars and restaurants like they were in February.
Toss it open to all three. I got the retail numbers yesterday, and last month's retail was off perilously close to 9%. Assuming that this is a slow, that there is a recovery of however speed, whatever duration, and whatever depth, extent. Are we seeing retail as we have known it in its closing days? Mervin, we'll start with you. Some of the small merchants it just seems obvious they're not going to be able to come back.
All right. I mean, I think so. Any crisis, I think, pushes over the edge the types of businesses that were already struggling before the crisis. So if a lot of these types of retail and old models of retail that were struggling to compete with e-commerce and compete with just how other retailers were performing, a lot of them will probably close, and it's going to be the crisis that pushed them over the edge. But it's important to remember that they were probably going to close the next time there was a recession or whatever economic hangover there was. So it isn't the crisis per se that pushed those retail establishments over the edge. I think a lot of them were already struggling. So on the other hand, I think people, think that this is going to change consumer behavior a whole lot. People are going to use online grocery delivery and pickup and things like that. But because of how many people switched to those e-commerce services overnight, even something like Amazon Prime no longer delivers in 2 days on most items. So they're not, food or some other kinds of items. So most of the people switching over to these things, people trying to get into Walmart grocery or all these struggling to find slots, struggling to find the inventory of things that they need. So a lot of people that are switching for the first time into e-commerce avenues are finding, not particularly great experience. And I think at the end of all of this, people will really want to go out. That even people that shop online more often will be interested in just going out to go out because they've been cooped up at home for a while. So I don't know that it changes consumer behavior a whole lot in the long run, but I think in the short term it does.
Yeah, Randy Zook, are you in danger of losing, as Dr. Jebaraj just said, I mean, a lot of retailers up against e-commerce, the click of a mouse versus a trip down to the mall. Some of them are already on the edge, and it seems likely this will push some of them over.
Well, there's no question about that. I think that's absolutely right, that as Mervin described it, crises or recessions tend to accelerate change and accelerate the destruction of some businesses and accelerate the growth and expansion of other businesses. So the retailer of, 2 years from today is going to be a much more nimble, much more creative, much more flexible business than the retailers we see today in many cases, because they're just going to have to become more attuned to customer demand and more responsive to customer demand. And it gets back to that confidence thing. As Mervin said, people want to get out, but I think people are going to be cautious for a good while. We've got a good year ahead of us until a solid, proven vaccine is available to make it possible for us to go without any fear or concern anywhere. So that's a long time for us to be wary and to be masked and cautious about the things we're doing. So, as I said earlier, it's just not going to be a light switch flipping things back on by the middle of June or July or August even. The hospitals, the schools, all of these institutions have got to figure out game plans, and every business has got to have its own unique game plan to move ahead and survive.
Let me go back to Dr. Anderson here on the food and fiber topic, because you are dealing more farmers, ranchers in Arkansas, as other states, are dealing with more than just a virus. You've got market upheaval, and you're also many are fighting weather as well, Dr. Anderson.
That's absolutely right. I mean, we focused a lot on COVID-19 over the last month or so, but this is really a busy time in the production agriculture calendar. And right now, a lot of our row crop and specialty crop producers are probably struggling more with weather than they are with COVID-19. We have another wet spring, very similar to last spring, which was a really tough year for our row crop producers. We are running behind in terms of our planting progress from where we would like to be. We do have some of our specialty crop operations are into harvest of the early season stuff. Labor issues are probably more of a challenge this year, partly because of COVID-19 and weather again is affecting them. The forestry sector is a big sector for the state of Arkansas, and in a lot of cases, loggers aren't able to get into the woods because it's too wet, and we've also seen some COVID-19 disruptions there of some of those processing facilities as well. So, in agriculture, it is kind of a multifaceted problem that we're dealing with. A lot related to COVID-19, some not really related to COVID-19, but probably exacerbated by the disruptions of that disease. But we are a large industry and a very resilient industry, and I think our system is adapting remarkably well given the challenges that we have, particularly at this very busy time for most of our operators.
Well, one small state, but we export in the billions, both ag and manufacturing.
Absolutely. So,
and of course, this is a pandemic by definition. It's global. What's our market outlook, Dr. Anderson?
The market outlook, one of the things in the last conversation that was kind of on my mind, you talk about the loss of retail sales. Looking ahead, my real concern is how long globally we will see basically depressed demand because of a couple of factors. One, obviously, a lot of people have lost jobs and have depleted savings, and that will tend to make people more cautious. Just the overall higher risk environment, and I think Randy's right. I mean, we're going to be months, if not more than a year, down the road before we get the certainty or the assurance that a vaccine will provide. I think in a high risk environment, people are going to be more prone to a higher level of precautionary spending. And so I think all of that boils down to probably fairly subdued demand for a lot of our products, not just in the United States, but globally. And I think it remains to be seen how significant that effect is and how long that effect lasts. But aside from some of the more structural changes that you hinted at earlier, I think that there will just be kind of a general reduction in demand as consumers really kind of withdraw and move into more of a savings mode than they've been in the last several.
I saw a comment from one observer, I think in yesterday or today's paper. This will not be, as was mentioned earlier, won't be a light switch. Randy Zook, I think it won't be a light switch. It'll be more like a dimmer, a rheostat.
That's a good way to analogize it. It really is.
Well, Dr. Anderson looked at the ag, the food and fiber aspects of it. You're in constant touch with the manufacturing aspect, certainly, of Arkansas business. What do you see as the demand potential here in the next several months through the end of the year?
Well, a lot of our manufacturing is pretty basic kinds of stuff, commodity products like steel, and a lot of our industries or manufacturers are food processors. So, as Dr. Anderson said earlier, a lot of the shifts they're having to undergo overnight nearly is in packaging and quantity and size, rather than for restaurant or food service pipelines or supply lines. It's direct to the consumer. So those are significant challenges, but they're certainly something that can be overcome in a fairly short period of time. But a lot of our basic manufacturers have been running full speed right through this first month at least, or 6 weeks or so of this shock, because of the nature of the products that they produce. So a lot of our businesses are in really good shape. Some of our businesses are facing unprecedented challenges, but for the most part, our manufacturing sector is going to be one of the sort of the steady eddies coming through this thing, because they're still in business. People still buy stuff, use stuff, need raw materials, need tires, steel, food of all kinds. So that's kind of a strong point, I think, in our balanced economy in Arkansas, along with our solid ag sector. Dr. Anderson mentioned this time of year, I'm a recovering farmer and just went down to McGee to check out how things are going. And they're running wide open. They are busy. Their biggest problem is too much rain.
Let me go back to Dr. Mervin for just a second, because I think it was you who mentioned earlier in the broadcast the potential for a second wave, which the epidemiologists say is a distinct possibility later in the autumn or in autumn. Are we going to be, Mervin, better positioned economically should that second wave arrive?
Well, I think our economy is going to be running at a much slower pace through this summer, all the way into fall, and later in the fall when we might see a second wave of infections from COVID-19. But what I hope for is that we would have had better systems to mitigate some of the economic problems. Right now, we've tried to accelerate payments to households, do unemployment claims, provide business loans, all of which we've tried to invent sort of on the fly and have not been very effective. So we haven't really built systems to handle this scale of payment to businesses and to households. And I think if we have learned anything, and whatever processes we put in place during this time will be helpful if there is a bigger spread of this disease later in the year, in the fall, as people expect there will be. So I don't expect that the economy is going to be running at full steam before we go back into another period of infection and shutdowns. But what I think is important is if the government has the ability, or has developed the ability, especially state and local governments, to provide aid to businesses and households more effectively than they managed this time, because they have not dealt with the scale of anything like this before, but at least in the fall would be the second time they're doing it.
Yeah, well, Randy Zook, certainly Washington has opened the spigot, trillions of dollars so far. Enough, more going to be needed. Even as we speak, even as we prepare this broadcast, House is debating and likely to vote on another, 500 billion, another half trillion.
Exactly. Trillion here, trillion there, and pretty soon you're talking about some real money. We still cannot borrow our way out of debt. At some point, we've got to begin to address this exploding federal debt that's accumulating as a result of this basically all-out war on this germ. So, is it enough? No, not so far. It's going to take a lot more, and we're going to be astonished at the total cost of dealing effectively with this, as Mervin said, as we put these hopefully more effective ways to get money into the economy and to a broader percentage, or a larger percentage of the population, in an efficient and speedy way, because we've got so many families and people across the country who live right on the edge, paycheck to paycheck is the old expression. Lots of people it's about a month away from being in really serious shape for a lot of families. So we've got to be sensitive to that, and we have to deal effectively with people who are in that predicament. And we've got to find ways to give them a chance to get back to work and to be more and more self-sufficient as we go along. So we've spent a lot. We're going to spend a lot more to get through this.
Yeah, Dr. Anderson, we've got less than a minute remaining. I'll give you the time, the seconds remaining.
Well, I want to follow up on what Randy was just talking about. I don't think we know how much is going to be enough, because I don't think we know yet how big the losses are. These losses are going to continue to mount. I think there has been significant demand destruction for a lot of our retail products. I think, as I said earlier, I think consumers are going to continue to be very cautious, which will equate to weaker demand moving forward. So losses are still mounting. What we are going to have to do, because we can't shut the economy down completely every 6 months to avoid COVID-19 impacts, we need to be now developing more resilient and more robust systems and find ways to continue to operate and continue to create value even as we deal with this issue.
All right, gentlemen, and with that, we are literally out of time. We want to thank all three of you for sharing your insights with us. Thank you, and please come back. And we'll see you next week.
Support for Arkansas Week provided by the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette, the Arkansas Times, and KUAR-FM 89.